Hello, and welcome to the Life on the Fulcrum podcast. This podcast comes from the Vineyard Church of Wellsboro, and I'm your host, Carolyn Ruth. We are in our very first series. As a member of the Vineyard Church movement, we want to start out by discussing Vineyard DNA, or the things that are foundational to us as part of the Vineyard movement. We're going to be talking to members of our church who have been around for a while and understand how Vineyard DNA works in our little corner of the world. Okay, so I have Jesse and Shelby Gotschal with me today, and I'm so delighted that you were able to join me. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure. So one of my goals here, and I just already talked to you about this, but I'm just saying this for everyone who's listening too, is that we can help get to know each other a little bit better through these things and hear the stories of people who have come to the Vineyard from just a lot of different paths and a lot of different ways. And just hear all the different stories. I think hearing each other's stories is really important and special. Yeah. So can you just tell us a little bit about yourselves? What do you do for a job, or what have you done for a job in the past? Who else is in your family?
Sure. I'll start, I guess. I'm Shelby, and together, we have two adult daughters. So we're currently empty nesters. They are 20 and 23, and we're just exploring and navigating life. It's totally different now, but. We are self-employed together. We own and operate a business together. So we've done that for 8 years now, which is a very long time for us, especially. We tend to wander, and so just that we stayed in one place for this long is amazing. And I think it's the fact that we are self-employed that makes it so we are able to do that. We still have freedom, and we love to explore the outdoors and music, these things that we're just really passionate about. And I think, as I was kind of thinking about that, it's where God most has revealed himself to us in the past, where we feel most connected is outside and through music. He definitely spoke to us through songs and music before. And so it's like, we just love those things, and we love to do them as much as we can.
That's awesome. Now, Jesse, I know you play guitar. Do you play any other instruments?
No. I briefly dabbled in mandolin and kind of the more folky stuff, but I was like, well, if I have time to learn a new one, I might as well just devote it to guitar.
Just get better at the other one. Yeah. I did the same thing with skiing and snowboarding. I've skied for most of my life, and at one point, my he snowboards as well, and I was like, hey, that'd be cool. That'd be fun to learn. And he tried to teach me. And after one day, I was like, just give me a pair of skis so I can get down this hill. And I'll stick with the skiing because I'll just get better at that because I don't want to learn this.
Yeah.
Shelby, do you play an instrument or do you sing? Or I didn't know that music was that special to you.
I'm very spiritually connected with music. Depending on what he puts on will determine my mood for the day typically. I really connect with it, but I don't. I played piano as a kid, but that was history. So
yeah.
It's something I really enjoy hearing. Daisy plays guitar and piano, and so I really enjoy listening to it and connect with it, but I don't play it.
Oh, well, it's never too late.
I know, it isn't. Now that I need new hobbies, I'm like, maybe I could learn to play an instrument again.
That's right. Well, you might be surprised how much piano you remember. I don't often play piano, but I played it a lot as a kid, and I still have muscle memory in my fingers from certain songs that I played for a competition or something that I had to memorize, and I can still sit down and they're not perfect, but I can still sit down and play some of those songs. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's fantastic. So both of you grew up in this area, is that right?
Yes.
So how did you two meet each other then?
We grew up in the area. I guess my sister brought her home one night.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then we just kind of started hanging out, I guess, from there. We had a lot of the same mutual friends, and we became pretty good friends pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yeah. We did.
That's cool. So how long were you friends, or how long did you date, or whatever, before you got married?
We actually skipped a step.
Yeah. Geez, Davey was 5 when we got married.
Okay.
So we were probably together 6 years at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, we weren't really big on pushing the traditional roles. I think we kind of purposefully maybe rebelled against them.
Yeah.
Perfect rebellion.
So,
yeah. So I mean, we had our first child within a year. Like that was kind of, and we lived together.
Yeah.
Marriage, we kind of felt like was a legalistic push from the church. Like you have to do this or you aren't right.
Yeah.
And we pushed against anything like that at that point in our lives.
Yeah.
So,
But what made you decide to get married then?
that's a good question.
I don't know. I mean, I guess there's still a part of us that hung on to the traditional,
Yeah.
and it kind of flowed maybe naturally just through the course of life, and it's where we were at, and we weren't really opposed to it anymore, and I guess at that point in our lives when we did get married, we were living out west in Washington State, and we had a 5-year-old child, and so it really wasn't going to change much for us. So maybe it took a lot of the fear and anxiety away from a step like that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
I know I wanted it for a long time, and then finally he caved. Like, so you gonna do this or what?
Yeah. Yeah.
So you just get sick and tired of telling people, call you husband and wife. Oh, we're not married.
Right. Yeah. You feel like you have to explain
this
and
other
stuff.
thing, whatever that is. But
Yeah.
so it gets old after a while, I suppose. And we weren't opposed to it anymore. We weren't so rebellious anymore.
Yeah. That happens with age sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I imagine too at that point you felt like it was more your choice rather than you being forced into it,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. So you mentioned you're traveling out west. So I know you guys have kind of moved around a bit. Would you mind talking about that? And maybe we can also kind of go with a question about, has your faith been important to you? You mentioned the church. Has it been important to you throughout your life? And what was your journey with faith? And I know that may be related somewhat to your moving around. So
You can go ahead with this.
Sure. So we grew up in the small town, and I guess maybe some of the choices that allowed us to have a 5-year-old child by the time we got married, and some other things that accompanied that, we just started feeling like it was a little too claustrophobic for us. So we left for the West Coast. We had some friends out in Washington State, and we put this town in our rearview mirror and said we're never coming back. And
never say never.
Yeah, never. We stayed out there for 3 or 4 years, I guess. We really enjoyed it. We lived on the coast on a little island, and that's where I started painting. It's kind of working with some guys, and it was a time of a lot of, I guess, personal growth in our lives. We're out, we're on our own, we're kind of able to explore who we were going to be and who we wanted to be, without maybe some of the garbage that sticks with the small town living. Like, people decide who you're going to be for you. So from there, we decided we wanted to be closer to family. It was just getting a little old, the distance, and we came back here for about 2 weeks. Decided that North Carolina was probably a good place to go. We didn't want to go too far south because of the heat. We wanted to go far enough south to escape the winters. I mean, we were very methodical about this. Like, there's the Smoky Mountains there in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
We're like, well, if we stay to the east of that, maybe we'll miss out on a lot of the Midwest tornadoes and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
If we stay far enough in from the coast, we could miss out on the hurricanes. So we're kind of looking into like Western North Carolina. There's Asheville down there. We're like, hey, Black Mountain sounds like a pretty cool town.
Yeah.
You know, there was a band that I'd been listening to at the time with the name Black Mountain. So it's like, let's go check that out. So we took a weekend. I think it was a week before Easter, and we drove down. We got a hotel and kind of drove around the town and found a place to rent. So we met the guy and rented his house, and then drove back up for Easter, back up to Pennsylvania. And then the next week we packed all our stuff, and we had a 1975 Dodge van and a little Subaru Impreza, and we packed everything into that, which had brought us back to Washington.
Yeah. It was already in it.
And we just went down there. We moved into this house that we signed a lease on, and then looked for jobs. Stayed there for maybe a year and a half or 2 years. Decided we weren't done moving. We got tired of selling all of our furniture and having to buy it again when we moved. So we started looking into RVs. We bought an RV then down there in North Carolina and moved into that. We were in that for about a month in North Carolina. We had come up for one of her brother's wedding. We were driving back down after the wedding, like the end of a 12-hour day, and I got a phone call that one of my grandmothers had passed. So we're like immediately looking to turn around and come back up. And so at that point we're just like, well, let's just go back to Pennsylvania for a while. So we went back home, which was an RV, and then we did. We turned around and we drove our house and our car back up. And we stayed here for another 2 years, I guess. And then that's when we found the vineyard, when we had come back in that time.
Yeah. So your spiritual journey, kind of, as you said, you were out west and you were, figuring out who you were. So what, and I think that if I remember correctly, there's a time in your life when you weren't going to church at all. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. So what led to you walking back into those doors?
All right. So I probably checked out of the church around 16 or 17. I just had other, high school pursuits at the time, I suppose. And it was 20, maybe by the time I was like 24, early 20s or so. We were out in Washington, and I was working closely with a guy painting every day. He was kind of training me. And so we would work closely every day. And he was one of these later life converts, and I found that they tend to be a lot more maybe vocal about their whole conversion process. And so he was putting on family life, and every day we were listening to these pastors that would come on with their shows, and then music. And I grew up in the church, and so I was just a real pain in his rear end, I guess. Arguing a lot with him, a lot of stuff that it's just stupid things. And he was able to speak to me out of this relationship, because we ended up becoming pretty good friends. And so, like the beginning of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, we're at work, and he's like, "Oh man, you really missed a great sermon on Sunday. It was really good. You should have been there." And I'm like, "Okay, whatever." His name was Phil. And And then by, the end of the week, Thursday, Friday comes along. I'd usually see him on Saturdays, or whatever. And he's like, so we're going to, church on Sunday. I guess I can meet you at church. Last week was a great message. You don't want to miss this one. I was like, all right, whatever, Phil. Sunday morning, for those that don't go to church or that have night church, is a great time for sleeping in.
Mm-hmm.
And but it got to the point where every Sunday morning at, I don't know what time it was, 9 or whatever, the phone would ring, and it was my friend Phil. He's like, hey, I'm at the church. I'll wait outside the doors here for you. We can sit together. And I'm sleeping or whatever. I'm like, Phil, I'm not coming to church. Just leave it at that. And then the whole process would start over. It's a great sermon. You should have been there. This probably went on for the better part of a year.
Wow.
And there was another guy that worked with us, actually, that I had grown up back here. And the one Sunday, Phil called me up and he's like, hey, I'll wait for you at the door if we can sit together. I'm like, Phil, I'm not coming to church. And he says, oh, well, Luke's here. And I'm like, what? Why is he there? Well, we're going to sit together. So I don't know. For some reason now it's just kind of the catalyst that pushed me forward. I'm like, all right, fine. We'll be there next week. And we actually went to church the next week. And I guess we've been going pretty steady ever since.
Wow. And Shelby, were you just kind of like along for the ride with this? Were you on board? Did you have other feelings?
I was actually oblivious to the whole thing. I didn't know that Phil was calling him every Sunday until I knew that Phil was this annoying, he pushed family life and it just irritated Jesse to no end at work. He'd be like, because we were both in the same boat at the time. Like, we were just irritated with, the church and the pushiness of the legalism and everything, and just rebellious in that way. And both just really wanted nothing to do with it. It was, boring and old school. It wasn't something we could relate with, and that was our vision of church. And so I guess when he said, this guy's been bugging me and whatnot, I don't think I protested. Sunday was football day. And like Luke, we would go to his house for football parties. So it's like our football party is now at church, And so, and they'd go out. We'd go out with them after church every week, out to lunch at, Red Robin or whatever. It kind of became a ritual.
Yeah.
And so that was a lot of fun, and so something to look forward to as well. And the church was could have almost been a TV church that we went to. I mean, it was not at all like we would have expected. And so we were able to walk in the back doors and walk out and not talk to anyone, which was exactly what we needed at the time. And actually walking in and seeing some people that I knew like didn't belong there and were living a life that I would have judged them for at the time. And I'm like, what are they doing here?
Yeah.
And then they knew people and they were connected, and I don't know. So it was interesting. And I think the one thing, and people say this about our church all the time, was that we did have, a 4-year-old at the time, probably, and they had this separate building that was the children's church that was built like a full-size ark. The whole building was shaped like this boat, and it was all the kids' classrooms were inside. And it was just the coolest thing. And so, I didn't like at the time that my child was in a separate building than me. I was very controlling and
I can't imagine
very much in charge of her life. And giving that over to someone else was not my plan. But and I wasn't comfortable with it, but she enjoyed it. And so that was another thing where, even though we didn't connect with the church and rebelled from it, I could never deny that those stories, from going to church growing up, because I grew up in a Methodist church, and so you got all the Bible stories kind of
Sure.
ingrained and memorized, and you know, that's all it was to me. But at the time, you know, I can't deny that was a foundation built, and so that kind of kept me from going too far away, I guess. And even when we did and we were lost and things were really dark, it was I knew where to go, and it
Yeah.
was because of that, you know, childhood kind of the foundational stories that were just ingrained into who I was, whether I liked it or not. And so, and I couldn't deny the goodness of that. So I really wanted to give that to her as well. And I did. I knew that it wasn't going to hurt her in any way. You know, if I felt like, you know, the church had hurt me personally, but growing up, but it was really my own fault in hindsight. And you know, to her to go learn those stories and go to this children's church, and you know, I was like, all right, it's not going to cause her any harm, you know. And I, you know, I checked it out; they were safe. You know, they had background checks. I mean, I did everything like that. So, but like to learn the Bible stories and stuff, I thought was a good thing. So to have her go do that, and the church actually really had a way of speaking to us where we were in our life at that time. Not so much through the people, but through the message. It was very focused on cultural relevance. That church was very heavy on cultural relevance. And yeah, so they had a lot of really fun things. They had a lot of really neat graphics, you know, and so their pastor was very bubbly and outgoing. They even had a debate one time where they had a scientist and come in and some theologian come in and they were debating evolution. And so it was like, wow, this is cool. We're learning stuff. And so it was pretty neat experience for us. That was our first step back into the church. And it was non-denominational. And so we learned a couple things. There was like real band, you know, not just an organist. So there were like, things that we definitely took with us from that church that have, you know, brought us where we are. So.
Yeah. Very cool. So you're traveling around and then you end up back here. So then at that point, where were you with your walk with God and with church, and how did that lead you to the Vineyard? What was that part of the story?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we went to North Carolina, we were looking for a church, and we were done with the anonymous nature of this large church from Washington. So we had found a plant, and I'm not sure how long it had been in existence before we got there, but there was maybe 30 people. And so we were able to get in, and we wanted to do stuff. We volunteered a lot, and probably, I mean, it was very quick that we became quite involved, to the point where we're like, I feel like we should go back to Pennsylvania, and we had reservations because we didn't know what that would mean for the church if we were to leave, and then just because we helped out a lot, but then I mean the church ended up kind of folding naturally, which gave us, you know, I guess felt like permission to move on. So then we came back to Wellsboro, and we were looking for a church, and we knew exactly what we didn't want, and we weren't very hopeful of finding something that we did want. But maybe we could find something that you know, was good enough.
You could tolerate.
So we visited a couple different churches. Not very many. And I knew Bob and Debbie Morris. I had grown up with their son, and you know, my dad and him, we would take motorcycle trips and stuff. So I had known of Bob, and I knew that he had started a church. So I think that's when we kind of checked it out. We didn't really know what the Vineyard was, but we knew who Bob was. So we're like, oh, let's give it a go, I guess.
Yeah.
I researched the website
that
they actually had. So that was something. I didn't care how crappy it was, they had one.
Yeah.
So it was, and it's funny because but he said we know what we didn't want. Like, so when we moved to North Carolina, we knew we wanted non-denominational, because he grew up Baptist, I grew up Methodist, and there were certain aspects of that we didn't really like. And so I would literally call churches and say, do you have, are you non-denominational? Do you have a children's program? Do you play the organ? That was like a question because I knew, and it wasn't, not that we have anything like super against the organ as an instrument, but it definitely sets the atmosphere. Like when you walk in and there's the organist, kind of the traditional hymns you might be singing and the atmosphere of the maybe the age of the people that might be there.
Yeah.
And the church in North Carolina that we went to, that was very small, actually met in the Christian Academy, in the auditorium of a Christian Academy.
Okay.
So there was set up and tear down.
Yes.
So we learned that we did not like set up and tear down. It was our every Sunday thing,
And you ended up in the Vineyard anyway.
Yeah. So when we came to the Vineyard, and I'm like, that became one of our things. So do you have your own building? One of my questions, do you set up and tear down? And we were almost like, oh no, we can't go there. They're set up and tear down. Like we're so done with that. We were burned out on set up and tear down. So yeah, we almost, and because it was at night, it took us quite a long time to actually go.
Yeah.
We found it and we're like, yeah, we'll go to that. But then every Sunday we're like, oh, well, we're in the woods, or we're involved in something else. I just got dinner ready, or football's on, whatever it was. It took probably a good month before we actually made it in the doors once we decided to try it.
Wow. So what year was this? Do you know?
Jesse.
That would have been like 07, I guess.
Okay.
07, 08, right around in there.
Okay. I'm just trying to so we started coming in 05. And so some of the folks that have been around for a while, I was trying to create this timeline in my head of who was there when? I don't remember really a time when you guys weren't there, but I didn't know how close together we started coming. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's cool. Wow. And so what made you stay? What, even with the setup and tear down?
Yeah, right.
I think it was authentic, I guess. And so we weren't in there, pretending to be something we weren't, or putting on any kind of show. We were just, fellow travelers on the same road kind of thing.
Yeah, that's great. And then Jesse, both of you did VI, didn't you?
Yes.
What made
separate times. Jesse did it first, and that was actually VI is what got us to move back here the second time. Right?
Okay.
Yeah.
So go through that if you don't mind. So you were here and then you left again.
Yes. We owned an RV, and living in Pennsylvania with an RV as your primary house is not ideal.
Yeah.
We had, the skirting and the heat tape, because winters are hard, and RVs aren't made for Pennsylvania winters.
Yeah.
And so when we were here the first time, I worked over at New Covenant Academy as a secretary for a while. Jesse homeschooled Daisy for a while. He took on a mail route, and then we decided it just wasn't. We're pretty restless, I guess you could say. We don't fall into routine very well. We like to mix it up. I'm kind of like a gypsy soul, we like to move around and explore, and so it got very monotonous, and we decided it was time to go. It was, we had this RV. It was time to go, put it to use, and get out of here, because we were just falling into the same. It gets kind of depressing, I guess. And weren't making great money. I mean, I really enjoy my job, and it really like coming from a place where I wasn't very spiritually mature, that that they even gave me the job. It was actually it was definitely a God thing, because I went there with my little brother who was going to their open house to see if he wanted to go to school there. And happened to be walking, around talking to people, the teachers and everything, just trying to get to know the place. And ran into Terry Mickey, who was the headmaster at the time, and I don't remember even how it goes. I was looking for a job, and he's like, "Oh, well, we have a job." It was like basically like put in my lap, like I wasn't even actively looking for a job. Like I just knew I needed one.
Right.
Yeah. And I wasn't qualified. I mean, don't tell him that, but definitely like everything in my life, like that's where God just continually works in my life and heart, and my spiritual journey is that I'm always being put in places that I'm not qualified to be in, and given roles that I am not qualified to have. But like with him alongside, we do it and we get it done, and I grow so much in that. So that job, being surrounded by other Christians and in working in a Christian atmosphere, was incredibly a huge blessing for me, I guess you could say. It was a huge step in my journey, and I learned a lot. So
that's awesome.
Yeah, and then that was when we knew we were leaving, and I didn't want to start a new school year there and leave in the middle of it. I worked for the church as a secretary then.
That's right. I remember that.
Just in the interim between some people, and so. So then we decided to leave. We actually pulled out of here in like January, right? It was freezing cold. And gave work camping a try, which is where you like work for campgrounds and they let you stay there for free.
Okay.
So we went to Texas. That was when we went to, we were outside of Houston, Texas, about an hour west of there. And it was like a Yogi Bear, Jellystone. That was when Jesse learned that he really did not like customer service. and we learned a little bit about Texans that we didn't know before. We're not very compatible with the attitude of Texans. And so it was also a learning experience. And that, work camping is really for people who are retired, who have, they have kind of a savings, not really for a young couple with a young child who have bills to pay, because you literally just get a little wage with the free housing, free campsite.
Yeah.
So that just wasn't working for us financially, or we were very compatible with the nature of the work. Even though we thought it would be really fun. He actually dressed up in a suit as, who were you? You were Yogi Bear. Yeah, it was hilarious.
Man, I would love to see that.
In Texas, so it was a little hot, but yeah, it was a lot of fun, and we grew from it, of course. But we decided we needed something that would actually pay us money instead of just giving us free housing. So where am I? Go ahead.
Okay, so then we started looking around for work, and there's a websites that you can get on to find work with this kind of lifestyle. And so I had gotten hooked up with a company based out of Atlanta that they provide contract workers to local gas utility companies.
Okay.
Because federal regulations say that, all these various gas lines and everything have to be tested on, within so many years. So they would train us and then send us out to wherever. And then, so then my job became, I would have to coordinate with the local gas company and get all their maps and stuff. And then I would walk their lines and report any leaks and whatever that I found to them. So we were still traveling in the RV. We weren't quite as in control as where we went. which I guess was okay. We were willing to give
Yeah.
on that. So from Texas, we went up to Atlanta for training, and then Atlanta, my first assignment was down in Biloxi, Mississippi, and then we spent, I don't know, 3 or 4 months there, and then we went up to Jackson, Mississippi, and that is where we found the Vineyard Church of Jackson, Mississippi.
Oh, okay.
That came to be, that was, we were there maybe 8 months, but we had known of the Vineyard because obviously we came out of one from here, and that was just eye-opening experience as far as they were a well-established, everything you would anticipate from walking into a vineyard. Very Holy Spirit led, signs and tongues, and it was. We had not had a lot of experience with this, and I can remember a couple conversations, whether or not we were going to go to church that week, just because there was something going on, and it honestly kind of frightened us, and we weren't sure what to do with it.
Yeah, we didn't have a box for that.
Yeah.
So, but the people of the South, there's something else, and so just like very open and say whatever they want, and so friendly and hospitable, and so all of this, combined with the very strong presence of the Holy Spirit was intimidating for sure. There was a lot of stuff that we didn't know how to handle there. Yeah. But it was good.
Yeah,
it wasn't. Really good. There was actually a time when I went into it, I knew that they were going to be doing something very spiritual that week. They had announced it. There was some prophet or something coming to speak, and it was something that I didn't firmly believe was real, So I just had a wall up against that, and so I was like, all right, we're gonna go. But Daisy's going to the kids thing. She's not coming into this with us, and we're gonna. My walls are all up. Like, I'm gonna listen to this guy, but I'm gonna scrutinize his every word, and I am going to, I'm not believing it. I refuse to believe it. I'm going to go in and just pretty much judge what he's saying. This is not something that I'm on board with, and so it was really powerful because I went in with those walls up, and he started speaking, and I was like, oh yeah, kind of rolling my eyes, like, this is all about you, and trying to make up things to say that what he was saying wasn't valid. And it was like all of a sudden, like involuntarily, which is how God tends to work in my heart, because I have kind of a stubborn, hard heart. And so, it's like he just comes in and all my walls were knocked down. And what the guy was saying went straight to my heart. And I didn't want it. I was like, okay, and it was okay. And all the walls fell down, and I was really receiving what he was saying in a way that I did not intend to do. and it was good. And that was when I was like, all right, this is the Holy Spirit here. And it's okay, and I kind of had a sense of peace about what was going on there, that it wasn't, I didn't want to be misled,
Sure.
with false prophets and everything that they warn about in the Bible.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm not going to be, some sheep going down the wrong path here, and I figured this out. So, but, and I still can't really make sense of what he said or what was happening, but I do know that what happened inside of me at the time. And that was real, and there's nothing I could do to change that.
So did that experience make you more open to the other things that were going on? Did you start to feel more comfortable with that, or not necessarily?
Yeah, for me, definitely did. Yeah, and there was that church, we had been traveling around for a while, and although we were pretty close and we really enjoy each other's company and stuff, there's 3 of us in this 10 by 36 foot RV all the time, and and the nature of living in an RV and moving around the country attracts undesirable There's people
Mm.
that are running from stuff that are
Oh,
also doing the same thing you're doing,
I wouldn't have
So,
thought of that, but yeah, that makes sense.
so we see pretty sketchy people in these campgrounds, and we're like, so we made it a point just for the safety of our daughter and ourselves, like not to connect with people in the campground.
Yeah.
And so it became very lonely for me. Like I had, so he was out surveying gas lines, and I was staying in the RV at home, homeschooling Daisy. But I had also taken training to do medical transcription. So I was working all day doing medical transcription. So I could be anywhere as long as I had internet. It didn't matter. So anyway, so it was just like work and you never really leave the house except to walk the dogs around the campground and avoid people. And so it got really taxing on me because I am a people person. I like to connect with people, and that's important. So I was very lonely anyway. There was a time when I went to church and they would do this thing, their ministry time, and there was actually some guy who I still kind of feel like was a little self-righteous about it, but he would walk around and like point at people. You need to go up front. And I was like, don't ever point at me, please, because I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna listen to you. But anyway, other people responded to it a lot better than I did. And they went up front. But so there was a time when I was standing there and they pray and people would come and like we do at church, and just random everybody was allowed to go pray for anyone and give words of wisdom to anyone. It wasn't just the pastor. There was a lot of people just milling around through their ministry times. And so there was also a guy that quite frequently would come over and give Jesse words. But anyway, for me, there was that one time when I was super, super lonely, and I was like, Lord, I just need you to speak to me right now. If you're like here at all, if you care, if you even see me, there was a lot of dark moments throughout my spiritual journey.
Yeah.
And I felt very, alone and like, I didn't really matter. And nothing happened during the ministry time. And I was like, because people were getting spoken to, people were getting words. And I'm like, I want that. I need that. I need to hear from you right now. It's like dry bones here.
Yeah.
And so we ended up walking out the door, and behind me comes this older guy, just your average, could be anybody's grandpa or dad. And he comes up to me and he like grabs me, and we're, funneling through this door. It was kind of crowded. And he just kind of taps on my shoulder. He's like, hey, I feel like God's telling me to tell you something. And I was like, okay, sure. And he said, which I can't imagine the amount of wrestling he did to come say this to me, because I would definitely wrestle to actually deliver this message. He said, you're not as far from God as you think you are. And that was transformational for me. I mean, I literally started crying in the doorway.
Yeah.
And like, I lost it. I was like, I didn't know what I needed to hear. But that was exactly what I needed to hear. And so I'm very grateful for his obedience and sharing that word with me. And grateful for God to just show me that, it reaffirmed that he did see me where I was. And, I wasn't alone. And there was just a lot of like accepting that somebody could really do that, come up and speak to you, and that God could use these people. And I don't know if you want to share about the guy that spoke to you from there or not.
I mean, it's nothing quite as life-changing or significant as that. But like the same idea, this guy, I mean, he was, easily 6.5 feet maybe. Just a big guy, biker, wore the leathers, rode the Harley every week, and just kind of an intimidating person.
Yeah.
But he was always like every week he had something, some kind of words, encouragement, or a prayer or something, and it was probably every week he would have something else, and it was just like it was eye-opening to see how this guy, like, I don't know that I expressed to him how meaningful this was, but it was actually pretty really impactful, the things that he was saying and the things that he was praying over me. And just the package in which God delivered these messages was eye-opening. Because I grew up in a church where a man like that did not have a place.
Just thinking about just what you just said and what Shelby was saying earlier about how, the times that you've grown have been the times that you've been unqualified for things and you've been pushed into them. And I marvel at that. I mean, that's what God does. Like, that's all through the Bible. Like, he takes people who are in the packages that you wouldn't expect and puts them in places that they are unqualified or they feel unqualified for. And he does amazing things. And it's awesome to hear that from you guys. So I don't want to cut you off. Go ahead. What are you going to say?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Well, it sounds like you had a really awesome time at that vineyard and just got to see. And I also do love that, the saying, if you've seen one vineyard, you've seen one vineyard, because they're unique and they're, led by the pastors to lead that area and that community. And I really value that they're not cookie cutter and, directives don't come down from on high, irrespective of the area where your church is, and I know some churches struggle with that. So just thinking about one of the things I wanted to touch on in this series too, is just vineyard distinctives. Like, kingdom theology is not unique to the vineyard, but it's a really big part of the vineyard. And I sent you a little list. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it, but of the radical middle, or everybody gets to play, or the come Holy Spirit prayer, or remembering the poor, worship, 5-step prayer model, doing the stuff, church planting, all of those things. And there's so many more. The little phrasing and the little nomenclature that we use within the vineyard sometimes. And I just would love to hear, whether related to going through VI or not, what of those have been meaningful to you and have drawn you closer to God and helped you to understand him and people better?
I would kind of wrap up two of them. Everyone gets to play, and naturally supernatural. And using that individual from Mississippi as a good example, how he was just a guy, willing to follow the leading of the Spirit. Just so in that, I mean, everybody gets to play, and he was just natural about it. He wasn't using big words or putting on this, fake front. He was just kind of he was just doing his thing. And then with those two in mind, I've really enjoyed going through the Bible, like the Old Testament especially, and just finding the humanity in a lot of the people that we kind of hold up on a pedestal.
Sure.
Because they were human, and if you look for it, they were pretty messy humans. And
yes.
I like seeing that. I like seeing their humanity, and like David and the Psalms, and his lows, and Moses and his insecurities. And, I like finding that kind of example in the Bible with everyone gets to play.
Yeah, I know. Well, I love the Psalms. I find them to be so, I don't know, so real, so raw. So David was not afraid to say, and I know he wasn't the only writer of the Psalms, but he wasn't afraid to say anything to God. you know, and that has helped me to also not be afraid to say anything to God. You know, God is big enough. He can handle us and our roughness and our messiness. And he's not afraid. He already knows, first of all, and he is not afraid of that. And it doesn't diminish him. In fact, it expands him. You know, like, I know that's been super impactful for me as well. Like, yeah. What about you, Shelby?
I guess I was thinking, like through VI, I learned a lot about the kingdom theology, and one thing that really changed for me was the Lord's Prayer, like because there's in growing up Methodist, and you memorize these things, but I didn't really know what the impact or what I was saying really. You just say it, and so praying the Lord's Prayer has definitely changed for me since learning kingdom theology in the way of learning, and also for healing for people, and just learning that God's kingdom, is here and is at work among us, and it's good because, like, I think as a kid, I just pictured like this big guy with a staff on a chair, like striking people with lightning and like judgment and the Old Testament God, stories, and so to think that when I was saying, your kingdom come and your will be done is really speaking good into the world, all that is pure and true, and life to the full, all these things, like it just covers them all, your will be done. And also like the phrase that a lot of people will use, God allowed that to happen, totally like changed for me, because God's will is here and his kingdom is here. Our will and the broken, the fallen world we live in, and the will of Satan, they're all active, like here together now, and that is the tension that we're dealing with, and so it is not God's will to harm people. Cancer is not God's will. He wouldn't give that to someone, and just the whole premise of we are saved by grace and not by works, and then we won't be punished for things that we do, or we can't earn our way into the favor of God in heaven. And so I mean, just praying that prayer just kind of like encompasses all that for me, and to say your will be done, and it's not going to be like, your will be done, go along with it. Please don't hurt me too bad, like, no, like, and your will be done, and that is everything good that that we desire in the world, peace and love to just prevail over everything, and so it really made that prayer a lot more powerful for me. As far as kingdom theology goes, it brought it down to like attainable, within reach to the God's kingdom is here. And we can't ever explain the whys and hows of when it wins and when it doesn't, and who's healed and who's not, or when they're healed, or but that's all the mystery and the free will that we just need to have in this world. And so that's the whole kingdom theology. Actually reading through the distinctives, one that we don't actually say very often stuck out to me, and it was the meat is in the street. And I was like, well, that's not only really fun to say, but that really like speaks to me, and like I looked into it a little more just to make sure I was kind of on the same page with it. But where they're doing Bible study or whatever one time, and some lady comes up to John and is like, when do we get into like the meat of this stuff, and to which he replied, the meat is in the street, and I'm like, yes, that's like when you're thinking about like getting into the meat of it, it's like, the substance and bringing life to the story that would just otherwise be a story. And that is, you got to go do it. Like, you got to really get into it. And it's not here in the church and the study that we're doing currently, it's through practice. That's just how I learn. I'm not like a, very intellectual book learner type. I'm a very hands-on, experience-based learner. And so to say that first speaks to that part of me, but it's also very literal in that, we are meat, and like,
yeah.
There's a lot of us, us included, who don't ever want to step foot into a church, in where we were before, but we don't connect. We don't feel like we belong. There's people that will never step foot into a church. So they, being the meat, are literally, like out in the street. They're not going to come through those doors. So if you want to reach them, you really have to go seek and find them. And so that one really spoke to me because it's just the way I operate. I have a real heart for those that are where we were and lost and just in a really dark place and, for whatever reason, don't want to step foot into a church or feel like they'll be, struck with lightning if they do, or just feel put off by the whole thing. And one thing that stands out to me about that too is that we met a guy a couple years ago through work, and through talking with him, he realized, we go to church. I think he found out Jesse preached or something somehow, just through natural conversation.
Yeah.
And through natural conversation, because this guy didn't mind sharing his mind with people. We learned that he didn't like the church, mainly because he liked to drink and, not like in a bad way, but just going out with friends, and that was just kind of his lifestyle, and his mother-in-law told him, he's a sinner for that. And also would never go to any restaurants that even served alcohol because they're all sinners for doing that, or like you can't even like eat there. And so that was his only, we learned that was his only interaction with Christianity, with the church, with God. Like it was Christmas time, and somehow or another, through natural conversation, we learned that he didn't know the Christmas story.
Oh, wow.
And he's my age and had never heard the Christmas story. And we were honestly like taken aback by that in a way that, like, thinking about it, there are people here in our county, we're surrounded by, we don't even know that are like generations removed from the church.
Yeah.
So maybe their grandmother was hurt by the church. I mean, there was a time when everybody, I think, was a Christian. It was like a thing.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It was like, are you an American? You're a Christian.
Right.
You go to church.
Yes. And that's a whole other conversation, but
So generations removed from that, at some point, somebody decided to stop going, and to the point where he was never even like, it was never mentioned, never taught. He never knew anything about it.
Wow.
And so that interaction with his mother-in-law was all he knew. And so it was like scary. I was like, we're not doing our job here.
Right.
Like, like, how do we like reach these poor people? Like, and so luckily, I mean, we had the foundation, whether we thought it was helpful or not, to know where to go and where to turn it. And we knew the basic stories. And so, it's like those people, they're never going to walk into a church on their own. So you have to meet them in the street.
Yeah. It's amazing to think that there are people who don't know the Christmas story, like here. Yeah.
And but that brings in the whole naturally supernatural thing, which when we did a series on it at church a couple of years ago, everything's a couple of years ago to me. It was very eye-opening and challenging because it's something I've always struggled with, because it just wasn't something that was really modeled to me.
Yeah.
You're either like, there's a huge disconnect. You're either like supernatural or, you're you. You're just like, you're in your natural state. And it's like, and you put on your robes to be supernatural, or you have to like change your voice and get real like solemn and intentional and so to just have that naturally come out and naturally just be a part of who you are in your conversation with people, and not to be like afraid of offending, but you're doing it in a loving way. I don't know. It's like, it's a huge thing that just balances for me and keeps me in check, I guess, sometimes because we don't like fit into a box well. That's something that is and so anytime, like the 5-step prayer model, for instance, it's wonderful. But if I try to do that, I focus way too much on the steps. And I don't connect naturally through something like that, through being told this is your steps, this is how you do it, and so like I need to just be me and follow the Spirit and not try to be this other person that's really good at praying for people and they're getting healed. If you look at like the big people in the Vineyard, that are lead these huge healing ministries, like how do they do it, and try to just mimic them, but that's not the way that it's ever worked for me. It's worked for me most when I go into it and I'm like, you know what, I don't feel like it. I don't really feel like anything happened. I really feel like sorry, to the person I just prayed for. Those are quite often the times that they come back and they're like later on and say that was really impactful and like chains were broken and like things happened in me. It was warm and it's in those times where I really doubt and feel like I'm unworthy, So that's natural, I guess.
Yeah.
Anyhow, so that's naturally supernatural. Yeah, it's an ongoing challenge for me to try to like make that connection happen.
Yeah, I get that too. And I feel like I come to it, I feel like to some degree I've lived in a Christian bubble for most of my life. Maybe not as much in college, but it was still there. And I do feel like, okay, so how do I like connect more with non-Christians? Because I don't want to live in a Christian bubble. That's not what we're called to do. That's not how I want to be. I'm not only here to serve the saved, So I understand that. So just, as you think about our church and our community, what are some dreams you have for our area? Like, what would you love to see happen through our church and in our communities, even, more than what's already happened? Or I don't know, what would you like to see?
Go ahead. You get some? So for me, I guess, is along those lines of bridging that gap. I feel like that, where there is the disconnect and, between those that are so far removed from the gospel and also, the rich and poor spiritually and financially, like bridging the gaps that are so blatantly obvious sometimes in our community.
Yeah.
Especially even between like Wellsboro and the surrounding communities, there's huge gaps, and by just living here, you see that. And church planning is huge for me. So I feel like, and I feel like we're well on the way to this, but my dream is just being, the resource, being the connection that's just not being made for whatever reason between God and all the people, and the safe place that people can come and learn about this, learn about the whole gospel message and how much they're loved and that they can just really receive healing through the church, and that we could be, not just what did I hear it saying? The church is the hospital for the sinners, but I heard it said once that it's not a courtroom for the soul. There's not like judgment, but there's just freedom for everyone, whether you deserve it or not.
Yeah.
And so, just for people to experience that through the church and through all of us, like in the church and outside of the church.
Yeah.
So, bridging the gaps are huge, and church planning is huge. I'm really excited to see where having a building will help us in this area.
Yes.
Not to say that we have to have a building. I've always kind of felt like it's good to have a hub, because then you are like, so, you have a solid foundation somewhere, but, like all the resource, spread into the surrounding communities too, is very important, because there is a gap, and those people are not going to come to Wellsboro. There's people that the towns are so far removed from each other, even though they're 10 miles apart, as far as their values and their community, their pride. Everybody has their own community pride and their rivals, and so that's big for me too. That we can just, I guess, in many ways, just bridge the gap.
John and I feel that so strong. Like, living over on the east side. We definitely feel that tension, that kind of separation between the communities, and that's really near and dear to our heart too, and we're excited to see what will happen in the future with that. But I feel that also. What about you, Jesse? Is there anything you want to add to that, or?
Not really. She said it pretty well. I feel the same about most of it. I guess bridging the gap is pretty huge. Maybe being a place where people who thought they knew the church could maybe take a second look at it and be like, oh wait, that's not really what I'm familiar with, and maybe give it another shot. Or people that aren't familiar with it at all, to take away some of the mystery behind it, and just we're just people out here, and we don't know all the answers. We're just kind of trying to get through.
Yeah, definitely. So this whole series, and we just started this podcast, but I feel like we can't pretend that 2020 hasn't happened, even though to some degree, I'm like so tired of talking about it. But I feel like it's real, and it's in our lives, and it's affecting all of us in different ways. And so I just would love to hear from, your perspective, what has been challenging for you over the past year, and then what maybe hasn't been so challenging, or what silver linings or areas have you seen God moving in the midst of 2020?
For me, I think I make most of my connections on a more individual level, like one-on-one. So it's pretty challenging to not be able to have drinks with a few friends, and small groups is another one. Just this kind of smaller, intimate settings that we've really not been able to experience. I've been affected by that a lot more than I would have expected. I guess I'm not the island I thought I was.
None of us are. Yes. Yeah. When it's taken away from you, you kind of realize it. Yeah. What about you, Shelby?
2020, most people are going to always just remember, COVID and the impact that it had on them socially, and in many ways financially, and in every way. But 2020 for me will always be the year I lost my grandmother. And so this year was really hard for me in that aspect in many ways. So this year's been a very challenging and emotional and painful and a year of questioning a lot of things because like in hindsight, we've learned, that she was living a very painful life and hiding a lot of it. And that her death actually could have been prevented as far as we know. So it's very hard to accept these things as, like I was saying, when I was praying as she was sick, with all of my heart, like, and every part of me was just literally laid out on the floor praying for her during the days, and that God's kingdom didn't break through and give her life at the time. It's hard for me. I struggle with that, but I know based on the kingdom theology and stuff, and so to find, the silver lining in that, because that's what my grandmother would do too, so like, and COVID was happening, so we weren't able to see her, and it was like she's sick, and even though she had come home from the hospital at times, you want to go see her and give her a hug, but would you be the one that made her sicker? And like there's just a fear that's involved with it, and but yeah, so I mean, even though she did pass away, God was definitely working during that time. I can't deny the kingdom was there, and that, her husband had walked out and left her to die alone. And my father, the nurse came and found my father and my mom and took them in to be with her, realizing this because he didn't tell anyone he was leaving. So, and not only that, but the pastor they sent in to like sing songs as they unplugged her was, from what my dad says, just had the most beautiful, strong and powerful and comforting voice that he's ever heard, So there's silver lining because she loved music, and so that was the way that she was ushered into heaven. Then, it could always be worse, So I don't know. I'm always just like, and then shortly after her passing, my father had a heart attack, in which he should have died by all reasoning, scientifically, but I can't deny that God's kingdom broke in there too and saved him and gave him life. And so there's been a lot of like moments that have kept me from focusing only on the darkness and only on, the spirit of the sinful nature and Satan at work in our world, but on him and on the kingdom where it has broke through, and so I mean, not only has it been challenging for socially, distancing, and especially not being able to go hug those people that are going through such things. It's just been, for me, it'll always just be that year of deep pain and loss with my grandmother. So COVID is really an afterthought. And like, because we'll get over this and it'll go away and eventually, and that'll just never change. Yeah. Unfortunately. So yeah, just dealing with it. It's been a year of questions, a lot of questions, and and a lot of pain that just I've had to work through. So.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. So as we finish up, to anyone who's listening to this, who's heard your stories here, what would be a message, the number one message you would want to leave with them, a parting thought?
I would share the message that gentleman from Jackson gave me, and just saying, you're not as far from God as you think you are, because you're not. Because he is literally here with us right now in this conversation, and in your heart, and, whether you like it or not. I've learned through my life, that it's the times when I'm rebelling against God and maybe I want him to be far away, that that he, will take over. So, but if you're feeling like it is a year where you feel alone, and it can be hard, especially for people to connect through other people. And so he's right there with you in all of it. And I've said some pretty bad things to him, and he still loves me in the midst of that. So there's nothing that you can say or do to make him love you less either.
Yeah, that's awesome. He pursues us. Thank goodness he pursues us.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you, Jesse? Parting thoughts?
I guess I would just say, God loves you. I feel like it's one of those things that's kind of been said, and you kind of tend to brush it off or gloss over it. But one of the most impactful things that I've got from the School of Kingdom Ministry was, I don't even remember who said it, but they said that Jesus did not come to save us from God. And it really just kind of put everything in perspective. It's not like Jesus came down and he was like, hold on a minute, let me deal with these guys. God sent him as a way, and like you said, he's actively pursuing us. And there's so many wrong ideas and misconceptions about who God is. I would just bring it back around. God.
Yeah. Awesome. It's a great way to end. Well, thank you guys so much. And I just really appreciate you sharing your heart today.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for joining us today on the Life on the Fulcrum podcast. You can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts, and you can find information about the Vineyard Church of Wellsboro at wellsborovineyard.org, or check us out on Facebook under the Vineyard Church of Wellsboro, on Instagram under Wellsboro Vineyard, that's all one word, or on Twitter at VC Wellsboro. Thanks. See you around.